Okay, guys, are you ready for this? This is how we're starting today. 2 Samuel 12, that's not where we are, but 2 Samuel 12, 10 through 11. Here we go. I just want you to remember this. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. So that is your refresher from, oh my gosh, just yesterday. So that's your refresher from yesterday. And the reason is because that's going to be our reading for today. This, I feel like, is a very emotional reading. Opinions, I think, might be all over the place. And so I'd love to hear your opinion because it may be different from mine. So today's reading, first of all, today we are in day 118 of the Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. I'm Kathy Carter. I'm hosting this, and I'm sharing my thoughts with you on daily Bible readings, going through the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan using the 1 Year Chronological Bible online.com. So you would go on there, you would download their free reading plan, the chronological order one, and then you would be on what is today's day 18, which is April 27th. And our reading is 2 Samuel 12, 26 through 14, and then 1 Chronicles 20, 2 through 3, and then 1 Chronicles 20, just so that's it, 2 through 3. And then just, that little chunk is just a repeat of what happens in 2 Samuel. So I probably won't take too much time to go into that section. But remember this from yesterday, right? Remember the calamity on the house. So your very brief background. David is king. David has been king for some period of time. We're not 100% sure what that period of time is, but he's been king for a period of time, and he had been going to war. He had been winning wars through God. He brought all of the tribes of Israel together. So all of the 12 tribes were together under one nation, under one king, which was David. And then there was a time, let's say, of peace. It's not fully of peace because we know that Joab, his first in command in the army, is going to war still, but he isn't. He's no longer going to war. He's seems to be no longer in the front lines. And so he chose to sleep with one of his mighty men's wives. Yesterday this happened. He slept with one of the wives, and as of course he wasn't supposed to, got her pregnant, killed this mighty man out in the field. So he got him in such a position that he died against the Ammonites. And Joab was in some ways responsible for that because he told Joab to do this. So David told Joab, the leader of the army, who was out at war while David was home, to put Uriah on the front lines so he would be killed. So I'm telling you a little bit of this background because I feel like there's some stuff now churning underneath, right? Like, at this point, both of them have really taken on, in some ways, some deep sin, right? So they're both, yes, an Ammonite is literally the one who killed Uriah, but both of them hold guilt in the death of Uriah. Uriah was not guilty in the eyes of God, and so he died as many of us would say he shouldn't have. I would say he shouldn't have, right? It was not his time, to use a better phrase. But he was taken out. He was in essence, he was murdered. And the people responsible were David and Joab. David was called out on it, and part of his punishment was calamity. Another part of his punishment was not that he would die, but that his son would die. So his son from Bathsheba died. And then they had more sons after that, and now we're sort of coming into probably a later time, but again, there's no dates really going along with this, so this kind of all might be a little bit intermingled. So today's reading starts with 2 Samuel 12, and I'm going to go right to it. It says, meanwhile, so while some of this other stuff was happening, while David was home and he was having kids, meanwhile, Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites and captured the royal citadel. Then he sends messengers to David. So Joab, again, is the leader of the army. He goes in with the army. He's kind of in charge at this point. And he captures the citadel, which is a pretty big place. It's pretty important. And he goes in there and he says, here's the deal. He says to David, bring your guys here and take this, or else I'm taking it and I'm putting it in my name. So this is just leading me to believe that there's now some bad blood between Joab and David. Understandably so, right? Joab is following David. David is supposed to be following the Lord. He's appointed king by the Lord. And so in some ways I want to say David affected some of the faithful following of Joab, right? Because Joab is following. There's a helicopter. I hope it doesn't overpower me. Um, uh, Joab is following David as a leader of the Lord, right? This is the servant that God put in place to rule over the Israelites. And so Joab is serving him faithfully. But what he's been asked to do is definitely not something of God. And so what we can see is there just seems to be turmoil now. Um, there's no longer, I guess I would say, peace between him and David. And again, this is the way that I see it when I look at it. And I know I try to exegete, not eisegete, right? If you wonder what those words were, I'd love you to look it up, but I try and look at it as clean as possible, taken away from some of my emotions, but this is an emotional section. And so to be realistic, I am sure in some ways I eisegete, so I bring some of my own personal information in here and read it in that way. So this is the way I read it. I read that the two of them have some junk going on, and contextually, I feel like it makes sense. But the two of them have some junk going on, and it is now bothering Joab. So anyway, nevertheless, David comes and he winds up taking over. He comes and he brings all of his army with him, and they wind up taking over. They take the crown from the king. The crown is like this beautiful crown. It's gold. It's got jewels in it, right? And so David takes this crown and he brings everything back with him. And then him and his entire army return to Jerusalem. And they repeat that same thing in First Chronicles. And now we're going to move on to, we're kind of moving away from war and we're going more into their personal life. So David had a whole bunch of kids, right? So he had concubines and wives and, right, all these multitudes of kids. We know at this point, I think written at this point, we know about 15 sons. That's it. It didn't even count the sons that he had from the concubines. And it didn't even count all the daughters that he had. So we're not sure about how many kids he has. I think there are some historical records, but he's got lots of kids. Amnon is one of his kids. And so Amnon is a son of David, and he falls in love with one of David's other kids, Tamar. Tamar is one of the daughters, which we just read about in Chronicles yesterday. So Tamar is one of his daughters, which would be a half sibling of Amnon. David is their father, but they have different mothers. And so Absalom seems to be Tamar's blood brother and sister, right? Full brother, I mean, not brother and sister. They have the same parents, right? So they're full-blooded siblings. They have both same mother and father. So Absalom is Tamar's sister, older brother, and Amnon is Tamar's half brother. So he becomes obsessed with Tamar. He falls in love with her. He's obsessed with her. He's got to have her. He can't sleep. He can't drink. He's ill, right? Like, so he's obsessed is the word that we're using, which I'm going to say is a negative word, right? Like, we really shouldn't be obsessed with something to the point that it's affecting our daily lives. And so he's obsessed with her, and she was a virgin. And so he knew that he couldn't be with her, right? He couldn't do anything with her. She was a virgin. So Amnon has this advisor, and the advisor is Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother. So this is David's nephew, aka the cousin of Amnon. So Amnon and this guy are cousins. This guy is also his advisor, and he gives him some advice. I'm going to call it terrible, but he gives him some advice. And he asks him what's wrong, and he says, oh, I love this girl. I really want her. She's my half sister. And he says, look, let's make up this plan. What you're going to do is you are going to pretend like you're ill, which maybe isn't too far of a stretch because he's ill because he just desperately wants her so much. And so he's like, you're going to pretend you're ill. You're going to lay in your room, and you're going to ask her to make food for you, and then you're going to ask her to hand it to you in your hand. So he does that. So he goes and he asks David, and he's his dad, right? So he goes to his father and he said, I'm feeling ill. Can you send your daughter Tamar to me so she can feed me? And I assume at this point he thinks nothing of it. Maybe this isn't really abnormal behavior. So he sends Tamar to Amnon. And at this point, it seems to be they're in a room with other people. She makes him food. She tries to give it to him. He won't eat it. So then he sends everybody away. So he makes it so it's just the two of them, which I think isn't really what they're supposed to be doing. But they are related, so maybe nobody thinks about it. Or maybe he's just David's son, and so David's son gets to do whatever he wants. But he sends everyone away, and so he's just with her, left alone with her. And he says, come into my bedroom. Let me eat from your hand. She goes into his bedroom to feed him, and he tries to get her to sleep with him. And she says, no. So she openly says no. She said, you can't do that. But she said, if you ask our Father, he will give me to you. So she's trying to appeal to him that like they can do this the way that the Israelites are supposed to do this. And she's very clear about being like, this is bad. This is not going to go well because we're Israelites, right? They have rules by God that they're supposed to be following. And so she says, don't do this. And he ignores her and he takes her to bed because she says, what about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? So she's even appealing about him. You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. And so she said, please speak to the king because he won't keep me from her. But he didn't, and he rapes her. So he takes her in bed, even though she says no. He takes her and does that to her. And then verse 15, it says, then Amnon hated her more than he loved her. So we have to really think about what love looks like, right? Because he definitely hates her, and he sends her away. Because she says, sending me away would be greater wrong than what you've already done to me. So he's already been with her. Possibly now he can marry her, but she can't marry anybody else. She's an unclean woman now because of what he did to her. So he refuses to listen to her and he sends her away. And then verse 19, she was one of the virgins, right? So she's wearing a certain outfit for being one of the virgins. And so verse 19, it says, Tamar then puts ashes on her head, which means she's in mourning, puts ashes on her head and went away. She rips her robe and then she weeps as loud as she can. So everywhere she goes, she's weeping. So she's not hiding what happened to her. And I don't want to go too deep into some of the points of the evil and the good of those that they're doing, but let's just put it this way, she's trying to follow God's laws. Amnon is not trying to follow God's laws. So she goes to her brother Absalom. She's weeping, right? She's torn her robes. She's covered in dust. Obviously something is wickedly wrong with her. And so Absalom says, what's happening? And he said, did your brother do this to you? And of course she responds that he did. And then he says, be silent because he's your brother. So she is openly shouting it out from the rooftops that a wrong has been done to her. And he tells her to be quiet because it's your brother. But his heart doesn't change. So like his heart towards the situation, as we can see coming up, is wicked. So he tells her not to do anything. But then here we go again with this storm is brewing inside his heart. But he recommends to her to say nothing. So she lives desolate in his house. So she can't be married. Only he can take care of her. And so she's living in a really bad way inside his house for the rest of her life. And then verse 22, it says, Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. That's how Absalom responds to this situation. David hears about all this, and he was furious. So let's see what David does. Nothing. David doesn't handle it. We don't see anywhere in here that David handles this situation at all. So I'm going to go back to yesterday. Calamity is going to be brought on your house because of what you have done, right? And I'm going to say these are some of the pieces of calamity. So I want to talk about something, but I just want to give it a minute. So 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shearers, Absalom comes up with this whole plan, right? So 2 years later, Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal-Hazor near the border of Ephraim. So he has these sheep shearers coming. And he said, hey, listen, let's get all the king's sons together and we're all going to shear our sheep. We're all going to get them to shear our sheep. And then he goes to David and he says, hey, his dad. And he goes to David and he says, hey, you and all your servants come. I got this sheep shear here. Come on over. I mean, I don't know. Was it a festival, a party? I'm not too sure. He says, let's everybody come. And then King David says, no, because I need to be here. And then he says, fine, that's okay. But send your son Amnon. And David right away goes, why should he go with you? Now, according to Absalom, he's invited all the sons. So you would think Amnon would be one of the sons. But does David know that there's some hostility and animosity between them? It's been 2 years. He hasn't talked to him, so I'm not too sure. But Absalom urges him, and then he sends Amnon with him. So he relents and he says Amnon with him. And then in verse 28, Absalom orders his men to kill Amnon. They do it. And then then after they kill Amnon, all the rest of the sons jump on their horses and they all run away. And it doesn't even say that Absalom was going to kill any of the rest of them. He just really wanted Amnon. So then as they're on their way, David hears that all the sons have died. And so he's mourning. He's heard that Absalom has killed all the sons. And so he starts mourning. But then that Jonadab, the one who had been helping Amnon in the first place, the one who advised him to get Tamar in his room. And it's even funny as I'm thinking about it, because I'm wondering why he says this, right? I feel like he's sort of like comforting David a little bit. And I'm like, but he's the one who set up the whole system in the first place. But maybe all he did was set up a situation where the two of them could be together, not realizing what Amnon would do. So maybe I put a little bit too much anger and hostility in this guy. So anyway, because what we're seeing is he goes to David and he said, he didn't kill all the princes. Absalom only killed Amnon. So my guess is there's something there where he recognizes that there's hostility still between the brothers. Likely knows what Amnon did, and so that there's hostility there between them. So he recognizes that Absalom only killed that one brother. And he said all the others are coming back. And then meanwhile, while all this was happening, Absalom took off. So Absalom killed Amnon, took off, ran away, went to go live somewhere else. And then it says, the man standing watch saw many people on the road and saw all the other sons coming back. So David was happy that all his sons have come there. So, and Jonadab obviously confirms that. And then they all came in wailing. And it says all his attendants wept very bitterly. Absalom fled, went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. But King David mourned many days for his son. And I'm going to go back to the fact that we don't see that he mourned for his daughter. Someone's going to say, but his son is dead. And I agree. But his daughter was raped and completely disgraced and living with her brother for the rest of her life. So that's a concern to me, right? So like here we are with David. We see him turn when he stops going to war. And could it be that he stopped going to war? I don't know. Could it be that when he saw Bathsheba, his heart started to turn away from the Lord? I'm not sure, but I feel like we're seeing this turn of events where David should have been doing some things that was not happening. And so this was the point that I'm trying to make, that what is our responsibility, and what, because like, so God said there's going to be calamity on your house, right? And now we look, there's 100% calamity on the house, and it's not even done yet. It goes even further. So there's absolutely calamity on the house. So God's prophecy obviously came true, as it would, because God only prophesies truth. But could David have done anything to prevent this particular calamity from happening, right? Was there something that David could have done to prevent some of this, right? Could he have handled the sons differently? Could he have handled the situation with Tamar differently? Could he have, right? Like there's all these things that are happening and all these pieces going into play. Where is this, the prophecy kind of meets the behavior sort of thing, right? And I'm just kind of putting it out to the viewer, right, who's listening. How much of this is that we aren't following God, and so these things come to pass, versus God's making these things come to pass, right? Or making them come to pass because we're not following God. So there was all these things up in the air. But I always just even come to this conclusion, because even though those things do happen, I want to come to this conclusion that what we are supposed to do is we are supposed to, in all ways possible, follow the Lord. We can't follow the Lord if we don't know the Lord, right? And we know the Lord not when we sit by ourselves and maybe possibly sit in prayer, which would be great, but or maybe we hear a couple things about him, but we need to be in depth with who he is at all times. David turned his eyes. He says, look forward, don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left. I've said this sort of so many times over the past couple of months, because that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to keep our eyes on him. When we start to turn is when things start to go wrong. So let's see what happens to Absalom. So if we move down, verse 1, Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab knew David. He knew that he was kind of devastated that Absalom ran away. But again, Absalom killed his other son, and his other son raped his daughter. And so David's in this weird pickle. And so Absalom is gone, and so he knows that David's kind of craving him. So he sets up this situation. I'm going to say that I think this situation that he sets up is almost and trying to be an exact replica of what Nathan did with David, but Nathan did it through the Lord. That's not what's happening here, right? Nathan heard a word from the Lord. He went in to confront David about the wrong that was done. David recognized his sin, and David repented of his sin. Let's see what happens in this situation. So Joab goes to Tekoa. So he goes to a different area. Pardon the airplane. He goes to Tekoa and he finds a wise woman. Once he finds this wise woman, he gives her this story to tell. So he tells her to go to King David and to tell this story. So I'm going to give you the story. So she goes and she meets with King David, and David says, "What's troubling you?" So he's like a judge. He's kind of helping people in their situations, his people, his Israelites. She said, "I'm a widow. My husband's dead." So she depends on her sons. "I had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other, and one killed the other one. Now the whole clan has risen up against the murderer, and they want him to be dead," right? So they said, "Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed." So then she says, "Then we will get rid of the heir as well." So then both sons are going to die, right? She's telling the story. This is not a true story. She's telling this, but David thinks it is. She's telling the story, and she's saying to him, "I have 2 sons. One is dead. The other one killed him, and they want to kill him, and he's the heir. So his name is going to continue on, right? If this guy lives, the name will continue on, and he will be able to have sons that will be able to have the house. Otherwise, she's left with nothing." So a little bit of understanding of the story. So that's what David would have understood, right? These 2 brothers are going to die. They were fighting, and then one killed each other. The one killed the other one, and now the townspeople want that other one dead. So going into verse 8, the king says to the woman, "Go home, and I will issue an order in your behalf." This is how it immediately starts going different from the issue with Nathan. The issue with Nathan, he immediately made a verdict. He said, that guy should die, right? So with the 2 sheep, he immediately made a verdict. Here, he said, "Go home. I'm going to issue an order." Maybe it wasn't that clear. Maybe he hadn't heard from God yet, right? So we're not sure why he didn't make a verdict, but he didn't. So then the woman pushes a little bit, and she says, "Let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt." So she's kind of like reaching out to him, like, help us through this. Kind of, I need your help to get through this. So she's basically saying, I don't want to go home. I want your help to get through it. And then he says, "As surely as the Lord lives," so now he gives a response, "not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." So he's essentially like, okay, so he gives his answer then. So she kind of cajoles him or coaxes him to give an answer. And he says, "Fine, I'm going to clear your son of all things," right? So your son won't be put to death. And then the woman is, again, kind of pulls a Nathan, like, "Okay, now let me speak to you and let you know how this really relates to you." She said, "Why have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son." So his son was sent away, and David hasn't brought him back. "Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises ways so that a banished person does not remain banished from him." And while I'm going to agree that that is true, a banished person does not have to remain banished from God, there are things to be done, right? There is repentance to be had. There is an understanding of sin. There is, right? So there's understanding your sin, seeking forgiveness, humbling yourself before the Lord, right? So there are a lot of things that need to be done. Yes, she is right, but it doesn't just happen because you want it to happen. So she says, "Now I've come to my lord the king because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought I'll speak to the king." So she's like, I'm trying to get you to understand. So she's afraid. And then in verse 17, she says, "May the word of my lord the king secure my inheritance, for my lord the king is like an angel of God in discerning good from evil. May the Lord your God be with you." So because he has agreed, she's calling him like an angel, like discerning. She's kind of like schmoozing a little bit. Then the king said, "Don't keep me from the answer to what I'm going to ask you." And then he says, "Did Joab help you with this?" And she agrees, yes, Joab helped me with this. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. Joab did it just to change the situation. He didn't do it because the Lord asked him to do it. He didn't do it because he felt the Lord was calling him to do it. He did it to change the present situation. And again, I know some people might go, yes, but, right? If it happened, then maybe this is what God wanted, whatever. He's not putting the Lord first. Joab, he's putting David first, right? He thinks like, oh, David wants him, so I'm going to devise this plan. This has nothing to do with them and God. So then Joab says, very well, I'll do it. Go bring back Absalom. So he tells Joab to go get Absalom and bring him back. And then Joab is so happy, he falls to the ground. And then he goes to Geshur and he brings back Absalom, but David won't look at him. So fine, Absalom's back. He's back in the land of Israel, right? He's not far away from the Lord, or from David anymore. He's back in the land of Israel. But David's like, I'm not going to talk to him. Let's fast forward a little bit. 2 years go by and Absalom is living in Jerusalem. And it says, like, they blow him up like nobody's business, right? Like Absalom he's got gorgeous hair. He's super handsome. He's praised. There's no blemishes on him, right? So he's like this amazing, I mean, like his hair weighs like shekels, all this kind of crazy stuff, right? He's got great hair. And so he lives and his daughter's name is Tamar, and she was beautiful. So he's got it all going for him. So he's living in 2 years in Jerusalem, and he's mad, right? He's still burning with anger. He goes to Joab and he says, I want to see the king. And Joab doesn't bring him to the king. He goes again and he says, I want to see the king. And then he sets fire to Joab's land. He sets fire to Joab's land. Isn't that crazy? I'm getting old and I can't remember even any words. Okay. So then Joab goes to his house and he's like, why have you set my fields on fire? And Absalom said, I came to you and I want you to take me to go see my dad. I want you to take me to go see the king. So in verse 33, it says, Joab went to the king and told him this. And then the king summons Absalom, and Absalom comes in and bows down with his face to the ground, and the king kisses Absalom. So this is where we leave off. And I want to make a note that I feel like this whole entire section, we see all these players, but this whole section is about David. And this whole section is about the way that David is handling these situations and the things that David is putting first. So yes, I think we can find, and in reading it, you can find all of these goods and bads and indifference and the way that they should have, could have, would have handled it. But I feel like, one, that this is the calamity that is being brought on David's household. But two, the calamity is being brought on David's household because the way that David is responding to things. So David is not following the Lord in these things. I said it 100 times today. I'm such a broken record. But he's not. He could have, should have, would have handled the Tamar situation completely differently, and then things may have looked different, right? So this calamity that he has is because he turned away from God. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow. Absalom is now in front of David, bowed down to the Lord. David obviously is pleased that Absalom is there. I'm sure he loves his son, so I don't want to take anything away from that, and I don't want, I don't know what I would do if that were me in that situation, right? I'm not saying it as if it's something that's easy, right? Like, oh, well, he just should have, put that son in jail, and he should have stoned that son to death, or right. I know that they are his flesh and blood. They are our children. For those of us who have children, it's unexplainable the feelings that we have for them, right? And so I don't want to take any of that away. I just want to say that sometimes following the Lord's desires are really, really, really difficult. But I think that's still how we honor him in that way. I'm ending on that because I think that I don't know if I could have said anything different. So that's where we end for today. So tomorrow we are going to go back. We're going to read more. I'm sure we're going to find out more about Absalom. And but if you like this video, if it was a blessing at all to you, if it helped you in any way, or if you want to comment, I still want you to like the video. I want you to share it, and I want you to subscribe it. Subscribing to it means it comes to you. And I make these videos every single day, so because we're reading every single day. So subscribe to the channel, keep reading with me, and I will see you tomorrow.